Item. I give and devise unto my kinswoman Lavinia Mary Strickland, spinster, daughter of the late Reverend Josiah Strickland, clerk, all that my timber growing in and upon my wood called Hallowdene Chase, in the parish of Ashwardine, in the county of Hereford, together with the stools, the tops, the lop, the bark, and the offal thereof, and free ingress, egress and regress by the chase ways and by the drift road at all hours and in all seasons, to fell, hew, convert, load, and carry away the same, to hold unto her heirs and assigns, for the term of 99 years from the day of my death, without let, hindrance, or payment to any person whomsoever. That was the whole of it. 14 lines of a clerk's engrossing hand upon a sheet of vellum the colour of weak tea, the ink gone a little brown at the descenders, the seal a disk of red wax no broader than a crown piece, and beneath it the signature of a man Lavinia Strickland had never in her life set eyes upon. It was read out at 11:15 on the morning of Monday, the 29th of March, 1819, in the front chamber of Mr. Raisbury's chambers in Broad Street, Leominster, with the shutters folded back, and a hard, bright spring light coming off the wet cobbles below, and lying in 2 long panels across the green baize of the table. There were 9 persons in the room. Mr. Raisbury himself, 61, attorney of that town for 34 years, in plain black superfine, with gold-rimmed spectacles pushed up on his forehead, while he read from a second pair held in his hand. His clerk, Mr. Fenn, at the corner desk, with the ledger open and the pen going. Mrs. Hibbert, who had kept the house at Hallowdene Court for 26 years, and had come in on the carrier's cart in her black bombazine, with the chatelaine of keys silenced under her shawl. Mr. Yarnold, the woodward, who had walked the 11 miles in from Ashwardine, and stood at the back with his hat held against his chest. Mr. Dallow, the butler, 2 of the parish, come as witnesses to the codicil, and staying as parish people will to hear the rest. Mr. Fulke Bagot, who had come up from Bristol in a hired chaise the evening before, and had taken the best room at the Talbot, and had told the landlord there what he expected, and Lavinia herself, seated on the 4th chair from the window, with her gloved hands folded on her lap, and her back not touching the chair back, because she had been taught at 11 years old that a lady's back does not touch the chair back, and because it gave her something to attend to. She was 24. She had been in the room 11 minutes. She had learned, in 9 of those minutes, that her mother's uncle, Mr. Sylvanus Croft of Hallowdene Court in the county of Hereford, had died on the 12th of March in his 82nd year, that he had left an estate of some 440 acres, a house of 11 bedchambers, a home farm, a walled garden, and a wood, that the house, the farm, the garden, the acres, and the whole of the land had gone to Mr. Fulke Bagot, who was the son of the old man's sister, and who sat now on the other side of the green baize with his knees apart, and that to her, a person Mr. Croft had never met, corresponded with, inquired after, or so much as named in company within the memory of anyone present, he had given the trees. Mr. Raisbury laid the vellum down. He took the spectacles off his forehead, put them on, and looked at her over them, which was the only awkward thing he did that morning. You will wish, Miss Strickland, to have the devise explained. If you please, she said, and it was at that moment before the attorney could draw breath to explain anything at all, that Mr. Fulke Bagot turned half round in his chair towards the two men of the parish behind him, and laughed, and said, in a voice that was pitched for the whole room, and that he did not trouble to lower, well, there it is, gentlemen, he left her trees, and me the land. The clerk's pen stopped. Mr. Yarnold's hat came up an inch against his chest. Mrs. Hibbert's mouth shut in a line. The light lay along the bays and did not move. It was said in her hearing, which was the point of saying it, and Lavinia Strickland heard it as she had heard a great many things in the 4 years since her father's death, entirely, and without any alteration in her face. She did not answer. She did not look at him. She looked at the vellum, which was where the answer was, and she noted, in the part of her mind that had been noting such things since she was a child, that the Devise had been engrossed by a clerk who cut his descenders long, and that the words, the stools, the tops, the lop, the bark, and the offal thereof had been written without a single correction, which meant that the man who dictated them had known exactly what he was giving away, and had not needed to think about it twice. Mr. Bagot was 48. He was a fleshy, pink-complexioned, well-fed man with thinning, sandy hair brushed forward over his brows in the manner of a much younger one, and he wore a bottle-green tailcoat, a primrose-yellow waistcoat, with a spot of something on the left breast that had been sponged and had not come out, buff pantaloons, and glossy black top boots that had been cleaned that morning by a boot boy at the Talbot, who had not been paid. A quizzing glass hung at his chest on a black silk ribbon. He had a way of holding it without using it. He had been a wine merchant in Bristol, and was one no longer. He had been a partner in a coach office at Bath, and was no longer that either. And he had come into Herefordshire in the last week of March, with a valise, a hired chaise, 1 clean shirt, and £1,100 of debts of honour, of which 420 were owing to a man in Clifton, who had begun to write him letters of a certain kind. Nobody in the room knew that last part. 2 people in the room guessed it. Mr. Raisbury had been an attorney for 34 years and did not need to guess. Mr. Bagot, said the attorney, I will come to your part of the instrument directly. It is not complicated and you will find it entire. But the devise of the timber stands first in the will, and I shall read it first, because Mr. Croft desired that it should be read first, and he told me so on the 14th of January in this room, sitting where Mrs. Hibbert now sits, with his hat on his knee. Read what you like, said Mr. Bagot comfortably. I've no objection in the world. The lady is welcome to the wood. I dare say there'll be kindling in it for her. He said that in her hearing too, and one of the parish men made a small sound in his throat that might have been a cough. Lavinia said nothing at all. She had not yet spoken above 4 words in that room, and she did not intend to spend more until she had something worth spending. Her hands stayed where they were. Her breathing did not change. There is a species of composure that is arranged for the benefit of onlookers, and there is another that is simply what a person has left after a certain number of years, and hers was the second kind, and it had cost her a good deal, more than it looked as if it had cost her. Mr. Raisbury took up the vellum again. The devise, he said, is of the timber, severed from the soil. That is a thing the law permits, and has permitted since before any of us was breached. Land is one estate. The trees growing upon it are, when a testator chooses to divide them, another. Mr. Croft chose. He gave the soil of Hallowdene Chase to Mr. Bagot with the rest of the land. He gave the timber growing upon that soil to Miss Strickland, with the tops and the bark and the root stools, and with the right-of-way over the Chase ways and the drift road to take it out, for 99 years, without payment to any person whomsoever. Which means, said Mr. Bagot pleasantly, she may pick up sticks. Which means, said Mr. Raisbury, without any alteration in his voice at all, that no person may fell, lop, top, bark, grub, or carry away one tree in Hallowdene Chase without her hand to it, and that includes the owner of the soil, and that includes you, sir, and that will hold until the year 1918, or until she assigns it, whichever shall first happen. There was a silence of about the length of a slow breath. How many trees? Said Mr. Bagot. It was the first sensible question he had asked, and he asked it too quickly, and he asked it of the attorney rather than of the lady who owned them, which was the second mistake he made that morning, and by no means the last. That, said Mr. Raisbury, is in the schedule. What schedule? The schedule annexed to the will. Miss Strickland, it is properly yours. You shall have it in a moment. It is a survey of the wood made in the summer of 1809 by Mr. Kellaway, purveyor to the Navy Board, in company with Mr. Croft and with Mr. Yarnold, who is standing behind you, sir, and who held the chain. It gives every tree of the Chase by number, by girth at 5 feet, by quality, and by mark. It is signed by Mr. Kellaway and by Mr. Croft, and it is witnessed. It has hung in the estate room at Hallowdene for 10 years in a deal case with a glass front. And what, said Mr. Bagot, does it come to? Mr. Raisbury turned 2 leaves of the paper in front of him and read, in exactly the voice in which he read everything. 311 oaks. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Mr. Yarnold at the back shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked at the floor with a particular fixedness, as a man does who has been paid 24 shillings a week for 30 years to keep his mouth shut about exactly this. 311 oaks, Mr. Bagot repeated. He looked at the ceiling, and one could very nearly see him doing the sum, and one could very nearly see that he was doing it wrong. Well, 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 a tidy little parcel of firewood. I hope, madam, you have a good cart. Mr. Bagot, said Mrs. Hibbert, I am speaking to my cousin, Mrs. Hibbert, and it is a family matter. Then I hope, sir, said Mrs. Hibbert, you will speak to her, and not about her, as the family are generally accustomed to do at Hallowdene. That was as near to an insult as a housekeeper of 26 years' service could allow herself in an attorney's chamber, and it landed exactly where it was aimed. Mr. Bagot's colour rose from the cravat upwards. He put up the quizzing glass and let it fall. Lavinia turned her head at last and looked at her cousin for perhaps 2 seconds, which was the first time she had looked at him at all, and then she turned to the attorney. Mr. Raisbury, she said, may I ask one question? You may ask 40, Miss Strickland. 1 will do. Her voice was low, unhurried, and pitched to reach him and not the room, so that the room had to be quiet to hear it, and was. Does the schedule state the quality of the trees or only the number? The attorney's spectacles came up off his nose about 1/2 inch. Of all the questions in the world that might have been asked in that chamber on that Monday morning by a young woman in a turned pelisse who had come in on the outside of the Ludlow coach at 7. That was the one that no person present had expected. And it was the one that decided everything that came after it. And Mr. Raisbury, who had been 34 years at his trade, and had heard perhaps 600 wills read, felt the back of his neck go cold with a pleasure he could not have explained to his wife. "It states the quality," he said. "It states the quality of every tree of them." "Then I should like to see it," said Lavinia, "before I decide anything at all. You shall have it this afternoon." "Thank you." She folded her hands again. "And I should like Mr. Yarnold, if he is willing and if he can be spared, to walk the chase with me when I come, and to bring the chain." At the back of the room, Mr. Yarnold's head came up. He was 55, thick-set, grizzled, burnt brick red about the neck from 30 summers out of doors, and he had held one end of a surveyor's chain for the late Mr. Croft in the June of 1809, while a king's man from Plymouth Dock walked the other end and marked trees with a hammer, and he had not been asked for his opinion about anything since. "I'm willing, miss," he said. "Thank you," said Lavinia again, and Mr. Fulke Bagot, who had come 120 miles to hear a will read and had heard it, sat back in his chair with his knees apart and laughed once more, comfortably, as a man laughs at a thing he has already stopped attending to, and said to the 2 men of the parish behind him, who did not laugh with him, the chain, "She'll measure the kindling. Well, gentlemen, God bless her, she may measure it, and she may count it, and when she has counted it, she may come to me, and I'll give her a fair price for the lot, and she may buy herself a shawl." Mr. Raisbury took off his spectacles. He folded them. He set them on the green baize beside the vellum, and looked for a moment at the light on the cobbles below the window, as though he were considering the weather. Before midsummer of that same year, in the moot hall of that same town, 4 streets from where he now sat, Mr. Fulke Bagot would count out £7,200 across a table of that same green baize into the hand of the young woman he was, at that instant advising to buy herself a shawl, and the parish of Ashwardine would stand along the wall and watch him do it, and the whole of the arithmetic that made him do it was already lying on the table in front of them all, in a clerk's engrossing hand, on a sheet of vellum the colour of weak tea, and had been lying there for 11 minutes. But that is the end of it. And the end of a thing is never where it is understood. To understand it, one has to go back a little, and one has to know what it was that Miss Lavinia Mary Strickland, of no fortune, of no expectations, of a turned pelisse and a pair of boots twice soled, had been quietly doing with her afternoons for the last 12 years. Her father had been the Reverend Josiah Strickland, and for 19 years he had held the living of Lanbrook in the county of Monmouth, a parish of 240 souls on the west bank of the Wye, 4 miles above Tintern. It was not a rich living. It was worth £140 a year, and the glebe was 3 acres of stony ground on a slope that faced north, and the rectory had a stone floor in the kitchen, and a leak in the north gable that was mended twice in 19 years, and reappeared both times in the same February. But the parish had one thing in it that no other parish between Hereford and the sea possessed in the same measure, and that was the river. And on the river, from the first week of March to the last week of October, went the timber. It came down from the forest and from the great woods of the marches, on wains drawn by 6 horses and by 8, and it was rolled into the water at Brockweir and rafted down to Chepstow, and at Chepstow it was hoisted into the brigs that carried it to Plymouth Dock and to Portsmouth, and to the yards on the Thames, and it went, in those years, at the rate of a small forest a season, because the country was at war, and had been at war, for most of the life of everyone who watched it go. A 74-gun ship consumed 2,000 mature oaks. Lavinia Strickland was told that figure when she was 7 years old by a purveyor's man sitting on the wall of the churchyard eating bread and cheese, and she did not forget it, and it did not frighten her, and it did not make her sad in the way that people afterwards liked to say such things ought to have made her sad. It made her interested. It made her want to know which 2,000. Because that was the thing about it. They did not take all the trees. They took some trees and left others, and the leaving and the taking were not accidents, and they were not matters of opinion, and the man with the marking hammer never once stood in a wood and wondered. He walked, he looked up, he looked along, he put his hand on the bowl, and he either struck it with the hammer or he did not, and the mark he cut was 3 strokes in the shape of a broad arrow, the king's mark. And the tree so marked was the king's from that hour, whoever owned the ground it grew in. She asked him how he knew. She was 9. He was a Devon man named Kellaway, with a scar on his thumb and no great opinion of children. And he looked at her for a while, and then he did the thing that men of that stamp sometimes do, which is to answer a child exactly as he would have answered a shipwright. He told her that a straight tree is worth money, and a crooked tree is worth a great deal more. He told her that the frame of a ship is not made of straight pieces, that a ship is all curves, and every curve in her is a curve that grew, because a sawn curve cuts across the grain, and a grown curve does not, and that the pieces they wanted worst in the world were the knees, and the crooks, and the futtocks, and the compass timber, the great elbowed limbs where a bow leaves the trunk at an angle a shipwright can use, and that a hedgerow oak that had grown up open and wide and awkward, with its arms out, the sort of tree a forester despises and a landscape painter loves, was worth 3 of a tall, clean park tree that had grown up straight in company. He told her the yard paid by the load, and that a load was 50 cubic feet, and that the measuring of it was done by a rule any fool could learn, and by an eye that took 20 years, and that the rule was in a book, and the eye was not. Then he wiped his knife on his knee, and went back down to the river, and Lavinia Strickland went home and asked her father for a book. He gave her one. He was that sort of father. It was a stained octavo volume on the mensuration of timber, and it cost him 9 shillings he could not spare, and on the flyleaf he wrote, "For Lavinia, who asks the right question. From her father, Christmas 1804. She had it still. It was in her box that morning at the Talbot in Leominster, under 2 shifts and a work-bag, and it had been rebacked twice. From 9 years old to 21 she measured trees. It began as a child's occupation, and it turned, by the ordinary process by which such things turn, into something that had no name. She kept 3 albums, bound at Ross in marbled boards, and in them she drew the notable trees of 5 parishes in watercolour, with the ferns at their feet, because her mother had taught her the brush and it seemed a waste not to use it, and beside each drawing, in a hand that grew smaller and neater every year, she wrote the girth at 5 feet from the ground, the height of the first limb, the aspect, the soil, the year of the drawing, and, where she could judge it, the quality, straight, bent, open grown, compass, shaken at the butt. Rind galled, 2 loads, 3 loads and a half. Doubtful, she was not always right. She was frequently not right. At 13, and she corrected herself in the margins, and the margins are the best part of those albums, and later on there were fewer corrections. And by 20 there were almost none, and in the last year at Lanbrook she went round with the purveyor's man twice out of civility, and once because he asked her. And on the 2nd day of the 2nd walk, she named a tree standing in a hedge above the ferry as a 2.5 load crook with a shake in the butt, and he laughed at her, and they had it down in the spring for the yard at Chepstow, and it made 2 loads and a half, and it had a shake in the butt. He did not laugh the 2nd time. There was no 2nd time. Her father died in the January of 1815 of a quinsy, in 4 days, and the living went to another man, and the rectory with its stone kitchen floor went with it, and Lavinia Strickland was 20 years old, with £11 a year of her own, 3 albums, 1 octavo book on the mensuration of timber, and no home. What follows is the part of her history that everybody who told the story afterwards got wrong. They like to say she was thrown upon the world. She was not thrown upon the world. She wrote 9 letters in a fortnight in a good hand. She took a place as companion to Mrs. Dorcas Pelham of Bewley Grange, near Ludlow, at 18 guineas a year, and her board, and she stayed there 4 years and 2 months, and gave satisfaction. Mrs. Pelham was 79 and deaf, and disliked being read to and liked being played to, and Lavinia played to her every evening from 7 until the tea came in, and walked with her twice a day, and wrote her letters and did the linen books, and in the afternoons of 4 years and 2 months, when the old lady slept, she walked out over the Bewley land, which was 600 acres, and had a hanging wood on it of 200-year-old timber that nobody had looked at properly since the American War. And she measured it, and drew it, and filled the 3rd album, and went in to tea. She did not weep about her father in any of those 4 years where any person could see her do it. She was not cold. She was extremely fond of him, and thought of him daily, and kept his hand on the flyleaf where she could see it. But she had worked out at 20, with the particular clearness that comes to people who have nothing to fall back upon, that grief performed in front of others is a demand made upon them, and that a young woman without money who makes demands upon her employers does not remain long employed. So she was collected. She was collected in the mornings, and collected in the evenings, and collected on the anniversary, and the parish at Bewley thought her rather a cold young lady, and Mrs. Pelham, who was deaf but not stupid, left her £100 and the pianoforte. That was in the January of 1819. It was because of it, and only because of it, that the attorney's letter found her at all, for she had been 11 weeks in lodgings at Ludlow at 4 shillings the week, considering whether to answer an advertisement for a schoolmistress at Bewdley, when the boy came up the stairs with a letter from Broad Street, Leominster, requesting her attendance at the reading of the will of Mr. Sylvanus Croft, deceased, whom she knew of as a name at the top of her mother's family and as nothing else whatever. Her mother had been Mary Croft before her marriage. Her mother had died when Lavinia was 15 and had spoken of the Croft connection perhaps 5 times in Lavinia's hearing, always briefly, always in the past tense, and never with bitterness, and the sum of what she said was that there had been a quarrel about a marriage in the year 1792, and that her uncle Sylvanus was a silent sort of man who kept a wood. He kept a wood. That was all Lavinia Strickland knew about him on the morning she came in on the outside of the Ludlow coach, sat down on the fourth chair from the window, and heard him give her 311 oaks. The schedule came to her at the Talbot at 4 that afternoon, in a japanned tin case with Mr. Raysbury's clerk carrying it, and she took it upstairs to the low front room over the arch, and lit her own candle although there was still light, and untied the tape, and did not come down to the ordinary at 6, and did not come down at all. It was 17 sheets, stitched at the left with green silk, in the hand of a Navy Board clerk. At the head of the first sheet was written, "A survey of the oak timber standing in Hallodean Chase, in the parish of Ashwardine in the county of Hereford, the property of Sylvanus Croft Esquire, taken this 11th, 12th, 13th and 14th day of June, in the year of our Lord 1809, by Jonathan Kellaway, purveyor, for the Honourable the Principal Officers and Commissioners of His Majesty's Navy, the said Sylvanus Croft being present, and Thomas Yarnold Woodward, holding the chain. Jonathan Kellaway." She sat quite still for a while, with her hand flat on the sheet. Then she read all 17 sheets, twice, and made her own notes on the back of an old letter, because she had no paper, and at some time after 11 she put down the pencil and looked at the candle and said one word aloud in the empty room, which was not a word her father would have cared to hear from her, and which she did not afterwards repeat to anybody, not even in the years and years that came after, to her husband. The schedule gave 311 trees, numbered from 1 at the north gate of the Chase and running with the sun. Against each number was the girth at 5 feet in feet and inches, the estimated content in loads and feet, the quality in the purveyor's own shorthand, and in the last column the mark 96 of the 311 bore, in that last column, the sign of the broad arrow. 96 trees marked to the king in the June of 1809. Compass timber, the whole of that 96, crooks, knees, elbows, forked heads, the great open-grown marcher, oaks with their arms out, standing in a wood that had been kept, deliberately and expensively and for 3 generations, in exactly the condition that produces them. Nobody grows compass timber by accident. It is grown by leaving a tree room it does not need, and by refusing to sell it for 60 years while it makes the elbow, and by paying a Woodward 24 shillings a week to see that nobody touches it. And at the foot of the 17th sheet, in the same clerk's hand, was the total content of the whole survey, brought forward and cast, 800 loads and 11 feet. She did the arithmetic on the back of the old letter, because a woman who has kept the linen books of a Shropshire house for 4 years does not take anybody's word for a total. 800 loads, the yard price for Navy oak she had grown up hearing, shouted across a wharf, £9 the load, and more for the crooks. And she would not count on more. 800 nines. She wrote it down. She looked at it. £7,200. It is worth pausing on the size of that figure in the year 1819, in the way that Lavinia Strickland paused on it in a low room over an archway in Leominster, with the coach horns going below. Her father's living had been worth £140 a year. Her own income was £11 a year. Her wages as a companion had been 18 guineas. The whole of the Hallowdene estate, house, farm, 440 acres, walled garden and all, had been let in the last agreement at £890 a year, and was worth at the 25 years' purchase that land fetched in that county in that decade, something a little over £20,000. The trees were worth a third of the land. Her cousin had told a room full of people that he had the land and she had the kindling, and he had told them so in her hearing, and had not troubled to lower his voice, and she had said nothing, and she sat now with the candle guttering, and understood, with a clearness that had nothing triumphant in it at all, that he did not know. He had not read the schedule. He had asked what it came to, and had been told the number of trees, and had made his own reckoning out of his own head, out of what a man of Bristol supposes a wood to be, which is a quantity of firewood standing up. She was not glad. That surprised her a little afterwards when she had time to examine it. What she felt at the bottom of it was the flat, unhurried attention she had felt at 9 years old on a churchyard wall, which was the wish to go and see, and to be certain, and to be right. She blew out the candle. In the morning she wrote 2 lines to Mr. Raisbury, asking whether Hallowdene Court could receive her on the Thursday, and whether Mr. Yarnold might be desired to bring the chain. And then she went down to the yard and inquired the price of the carrier's cart to Ashwardine, and it was 1 shilling and 9pence, and she paid it out of the £100 that a deaf old woman at Bewley Grange had left her for playing the pianoforte every evening from 7 until the tea came in. The carrier's cart went out of Leominster on the Thursday morning with a load of deal boards, a crate of hens, a churn, 2 women going to Ashwardine Market, and Miss Lavinia Strickland with her box at her feet and her father's book in her lap, and it took 4 hours and 20 minutes to go 11 miles, because the carrier stopped at every gate that had a person leaning on it. The road ran west and then northwest out of the red plough country, and the hedges were still bare, and the primroses were out in the banks in the sheltered places, and at the top of the long hill above Ashwardine, the whole of it opened at once, the parish lying in its shallow valley, with the church tower of St. Botolph, grey among the yews, the brook, the mill, the 20-odd houses along the street, the black and white farms out on the slopes, and then, filling the whole northern side of the valley from the brook to the skyline, 1.5 miles long and 3/4 of a mile deep, in that particular smoky purple-brown that Oakwood carries in the last week of March before the leaf, the chase. She stood up in the cart to look at it. One of the market women took hold of her arm to steady her and said, with the frankness of that county, "That's a sight of wood, miss," and Lavinia Strickland said, "Yes," and sat down again, and did not say anything else for 2 miles. Hallowdene Court stood at the eastern end of the chase, behind a stone wall and a pair of iron gates that had been painted 11 years before. It was a long, low house of the reign of Queen Anne in red brick gone dark, with stone dressings, 11 bedchambers, a wing to the north that had been shut up since the year 6, a gravel sweep, and a cedar. Mrs. Hibbert was at the door before the cart had stopped. Miss Dallow, the butler, 67 and in service in that house since he was 14, took her box himself, which he had no business doing at his age, and would not be argued with. They gave her the south chamber, because it was the one with the light, and Mrs. Hibbert had aired it for 2 days. "You will want to see the house, miss," said the housekeeper. "I should like to see the estate room first, if it is convenient." Mrs. Hibbert, who had spent 2 days deciding what she thought of this business and had not decided, looked at her for a moment and said, "It is convenient," and took her along the passage past the gunroom and unlocked a door. The estate room at Hallowdene was 15 feet by 18, with a north window, a deal table, 4 presses, a case of drawers for maps, and, on the wall facing the window, a glazed deal case 3 feet wide, containing 17 stitched sheets. There were also in the presses the rentals from the year 1771, the tithe agreements, 4 boxes of correspondence, a book of the home farm, and a run of small marbled quarto notebooks, 61 of them, dated on the spine, in a cramped old hand, which Lavinia opened at random and found to be a record of every tree felled, sold, planted, lopped, blown down or struck by lightning in Hallowdene Chase since the year 1758. 3 generations. 61 years of it. Grandfather, father and son, and the son had died on the 12th of March and had left the whole of it to a woman he had never met. The inventory of what else she had come into took Mr. Dallow and Mrs. Hibbert and the estate book about an hour to lay before her that first evening, and it was less than the parish supposed and more than she had expected. The timber of the Chase as devised, the stools and bark and tops, the ways and out of the personal estate, £100 in the funds, the 61 notebooks, the glazed case with the survey in it, and Mr. Croft's own field instruments, which were a chain, a girthing tape, a felling axe with a broken helve, a marking hammer that was not the king's, and a brass-bound rule for the mensuration of timber, the twin of the one printed at the back of the stained octavo book she had carried in her lap all the way from Leominster. Everything else in the house, down to the cedar on the lawn and the pikes in the stew pond, was Mr. Fulke Bagot's. She wrote that list out in her own hand before she slept, and put it in the front of the 3rd album, and then, because the moon was up and she had come 100 miles for it, she put on her boots again and went out to the north gate of the Chase, alone, at 10 at night, and stood there, with her hand on the gate-post, for perhaps 4 minutes, and did not go in, because she had determined that she would go in for the first time in daylight, and with the chain. Mr. Yarnold was at the gate at 7 the next morning, with the chain over his shoulder, the girthing tape in his coat pocket, a piece of red chalk, and his daughter Tabitha, who was 20, round-faced, in a dark blue print gown and a white apron, and who had been sent by her mother on the express ground that a young lady could not go into a wood with a man of 55 without somebody's daughter present, and who stayed for the next 11 months. "Number 1, said Mr. Yarnold, is inside the gate on the left hand. Master always begun at number 1. "Then so shall we," said Lavinia. The Chase was not what she had expected, and she had expected a great deal. It was not close grown. It had been kept open on purpose, in the old way, with the trees standing far enough apart that a cart could pass between any 2 of them, and that each had had the whole of its own light for 150 years, and the result was 311 oaks that had grown as oaks grow when nobody crowds them, which is not upward, but outward, short in the bole, enormous in the limb, elbowed, forked, crooked, spreading, every one of them a shape a shipwright dreams about and a timber merchant curses. bracken and bramble underneath, and the deer paths, and a green ride down the middle broad enough for 2 wains abreast, and along the ride, at intervals, the old stone rollers and the loading bank. Number 1 stood inside the gate on the left hand. It was 22 feet in girth at 5 feet from the ground. Its first limb left the trunk at 11 feet up, at an angle that Lavinia Strickland looked at for a long moment without saying anything at all. Then she put her hand flat on the bark on the north side and moved it slowly, and found what she was looking for, and it was under moss, and she scraped the moss away with her thumbnail. 3 strokes cut into the wood, grown over at the edges by 10 summers of bark, in the shape of a broad arrow. He marked her the 2nd day, said Mr. Yarnold. June, the year 9. I held the chain. He went round with the master, and he struck 94 before dinner on the Friday, and 2 more on the Saturday morning, and he had a red face, and he swore at the brambles. Was he a Devon man? He was, with a scar across the ball of his right thumb. Mr. Yarnold turned his head and looked at her. Aye, he said slowly. He had that. Mr. Kellaway, said Lavinia. He used to eat his bread and cheese on our churchyard wall at Lanbrook when I was 9 years old, and he told me why a crooked tree is worth 3 straight ones, and I have been finding out whether he was right for 15 years. She took her hand off the bark. Mr. Yarnold, I am going to survey this wood. All of it. Every tree by number, girth at 5 feet, quality and mark, exactly as it was taken in the year 9, and I am going to write down what I find, whether it agrees with the schedule or whether it does not. It will take a month. It may take 6 weeks. I will pay you for your time out of my own money, and I will pay Miss Yarnold for hers, and if either of you would rather not, you have only to say it now, and nothing more will be said about it, ever. There was a pause of the length it takes a countryman to be certain he has heard a thing correctly. Miss, said Mr. Yarnold, I've carried that chain up and down this wood since I were 19-year-old for a man who never once in 30 year told me why. If you're going to tell me why, I'd do it for nothing. I shall tell you why, said Lavinia, and I shall also pay you. They began that morning at number 1, and did 9 trees before noon, and the method they settled into on the first day did not change afterwards. Mr. Yarnold carried the chain and the tape, and did the girthing, calling the feet and inches aloud twice. Tabitha carried the boards and the ink, and wrote the number and the girth as it was called, in a large clear hand, because her mother had made her write out the collect every Sunday of her life, and it had come to something at last. Lavinia looked at the tree. That was all she did, and it was the whole of the business. She walked round it twice, at 10 paces and at 3. She looked at the head, at the fork, at the run of the bark, at the swelling where a limb had been lost, at the ground under it for the mushrooms that tell you a butt is going, at the north side for the mark. Then she said the quality aloud, and Tabitha wrote it, and they went on. 2 loads and a half, straight sound, 3 loads, compass, 1 good knee in the 2nd limb, 4 loads and a half, forked head, shaken at the butt, doubtful, 6 loads, compass throughout, marked, 6 loads. There were trees in Hallodean Chase that carried 6 loads, which is to say 300 cubic feet of oak in a single stick, and she came upon the first of them on the 4th day, standing alone on the crown of the slope, with the whole valley below it. And she sat down on the roots of it, and ate her bread and butter, and looked up into it for 20 minutes, without saying anything. And Tabitha Yarnold who was afterwards fond of telling this part, said that the lady's face never altered in the least degree, and that she went through the bread and butter to the last crumb, and then got up and said, 6 loads and 1/4. Compass marked number 79, and Tabitha wrote it down, and when they came home that night and set it against the schedule of the year 9, it said, in the Navy clerk's hand, 6 loads and 1/4. Compass marked. She was never once wrong that week. She was wrong 4 times in the following month. All 4 in the same direction, all 4 upon trees with rot she could not see from the ground, and she wrote each of the 4 errors into the margin of her own book in red, exactly as she had done at 13, and afterwards, when the whole of it came to be read aloud before a room of people who had come to see her taken apart, those 4 red corrections in her own hand did her more good than the 307 she had got right. They were 19 days into it, and had numbered and girthed 204 trees when the letter came. It came on a Tuesday in the last week of April, by the Bristol mail to Leominster and out by the carrier, and Mr. Dallow brought it to her in the estate room, where she was copying the day's boards into the fair book, with the window open and the rooks going over. It was on hot-pressed paper, sealed with a great deal of wax, and it was from Mr. Pringle, of Small Street, Bristol, attorney, and it was addressed to Miss Lavinia Strickland at Hallowdene Court, in the parish of Ashwardine, and it was, as such letters are, extremely civil. Mr. Pringle presented his compliments. Mr. Pringle was instructed by Mr. Fulk Bagot, of Bristol, gentlemen, the devesi in fee of the manor and lands of Hallowdene. Mr. Pringle's client was advised, and Mr. Pringle was bound to say that Mr. Pringle concurred that the pretended devise of timber contained in the 3rd clause of the will of the late Mr. Sylvanus Croft was void for uncertainty and repugnant to the devise of the soil, and that in any event the same could not extend to trees marked and appropriated to the Crown, that his client was nevertheless anxious, in the interest of the family and of the lady's own comfort, to avoid the expense and the publicity of a suit, and that he was authorized to offer, and did hereby offer, the sum of £200, payable in 2 instalments at Midsummer and at Michaelmas, for a release under her hand of all her right, title and interest in the said timber, the said release to be executed within 14 days. Mr. Pringle had the honour to be her most obedient humble servant. There was a postscript in a different hand, larger and looser, which was not Mr. Pringle's. Take it, my dear cousin, you will not get such another offer, and it is a great deal of money for a young woman in your situation. F.B. Lavinia Strickland read it twice. Then she laid it on the deal table, and weighted the corner of it with the brass-bound rule, and stood for a while at the north window looking out at the wood, in which 204 trees had now been measured, and 107 had not. Mr. Dallow, she said, is the boy still in the kitchen? He is, miss. Then he may take a note to Mr. Raysbury at Leominster tonight, and he shall have his supper first. The note said, sir, I am offered £200 for the timber, and I decline it, and I shall be obliged if you will say so in the proper form. I do not yet know what the timber is worth, and I will not sell a thing I have not finished counting. I have 11 days' work still to do. L. M. Strickland. Mr. Fulker Bagot came to Hallowdene on the 2nd of May and stayed 11 days, which was as long as he could bear the country, and rather longer than the country could bear him. He came into possession of the house on the Saturday, and gave orders on the Sunday. He countermanded them on the Monday. He told Mr. Dallow that a butler of 67 was a butler too many, and then discovered that nobody else in the parish knew where anything was kept, and told him to stay, and did not apologize. He walked over the home farm with the tenant and asked what the wheat would fetch, and did not attend to the answer. He measured the north wing with his eye and spoke of pulling it down. He had a valuation of the plate made by a man from Hereford, and a valuation of the pictures, and he asked Mrs. Hibbert 3 times in the first week what the funeral had cost. And on the first Sunday of his residence, being the 2nd of May, he went to church at St. Botolph in a new coat, and sat in the Hallodean pew, and came out at the end of the service into the south porch, where the whole of the parish of Ashwardine stood about in the way that a parish does, and saw his cousin Miss Strickland standing at the foot of the porch, steps in a grey pelisse, with Mrs. Hibbert on one side of her and Miss Tabitha Yarnold on the other, and stopped on the top step, and said to Mr. Bramwell, the curate, in a voice that carried to the Lich Gate, "You are to be congratulated on your new parishioner, sir. My uncle divided his property between us like Solomon. He left her trees and me the land." Some men would have waited for the laugh. Mr. Bagot did not wait for it, because he had never in his life doubted that it was coming, and that is a thing that should be recorded about him, since it explains everything that afterwards happened to him. He went down the steps and out to the gate, and the parish of Ashwardine did not laugh at all, and Mr. Bramwell, 35, slight, sandy, in his bands, who had been curate there for 6 years on £80 a year, and had buried Mr. Croft in March, said afterwards to his wife that he had never in his life heard a silence with so much arithmetic in it. Lavinia Strickland had heard every word of it. She was 11 feet from the top step. She did not colour, she did not look up, and she did not alter her face. She said good morning to Mrs. Bramwell, and inquired after the woman's youngest who had been ill, and walked home by the ride. But at the Lich Gate old Mr. Whitall, the tanner, who bought bark at Ashwardine and at 4 other parishes, and had done for 30 years, said out loud to nobody in particular, "Trees," and then said it again, and then laughed until he had to hold the gatepost, and went off down the street still laughing, and 3 men followed him to find out why, and by Tuesday there was not a household between Ashwardine and Leominster that did not know that. The new master of Hallodean had stood up in the church porch and boasted, in front of the Woodward, the tanner, the curate, and the sexton, that he had kept the land and given away the timber. They did not tell him. That should be understood, because people afterwards said the parish was cruel to him, and the parish was not cruel to him at all. The parish was silent, which is a different thing, and which is what a parish does with a man who has told it in his first week that he does not require its opinion. Mr. Yarnold did not tell him because he had been asked no question. Mr. Whitall did not tell him because he intended to buy the bark. Mr. Raysbury did not tell him because he was not his attorney, and Lavinia Strickland did not tell him because she had been offered £200 for a thing she had not finished counting, and because she had learned at 9 years old, on a churchyard wall above the Y, that the whole of the business lies in knowing which 2,000, and because a person who explains her advantage to the man across the table from her is not composed. She is only fond of being thought clever. He sent for her on the Wednesday. He sent, that is, a note carried by the boy across the sweep, requesting that his cousin would attend him in the South Library at 11 o'clock upon a matter of business, and Lavinia came in at 11 o'clock in her grey gown, with the ink still on her second finger. And Mrs. Hibbert came in behind her with the tea things and set them down and did not go away, and Mr. Bagot looked at the housekeeper and thought better of it. The South Library at Halladine was a long room with 3 sash windows to the south and a fireplace at the west end, and 1,100 books, most of them on husbandry, forestry, the mensuration of timber, and the history of the county of Hereford. Mr. Bagot had had the writing table moved to the middle of it, so that a person coming in had to walk 20 feet under his eye to reach the chair. "Sit down, my dear cousin. You have had Pringle's letter. I have. And I declined it, sir, on the 27th, through Mr. Raisbury, in the proper form. I supposed you would have heard. I heard." He turned the quizzing glass over. £200. In 2 payments. That is more than your father's living was worth in a year, is it not? "It is more by £60, said Lavinia. "Then in God's name, madam, why?" "Because I have not finished the survey." He looked at her. He had one of those faces that cannot conceal the moment when a piece of information fails to fit, and it failed to fit, and he set it aside, as such men do, and went on with what he had prepared. "Let me be plain with you, cousin, since we are family and there is nobody by." Mrs. Hibbert at the tea things did not move. My uncle was 81 years old, and he was by the end whimsical. That clause is a whim. Pringle says it is void, and Pringle is a shrewd man. Now I do not want a suit. A suit is a scandal to a family. It is 3 years in the chancery, and it eats the estate it is fought over. You are a young woman of 24, with, I understand, some £11 a year, and you have been living in a lodging at Ludlow at 4 shillings the week. He let that lie there for a moment, so that she should understand how much he had troubled to find out. £200 is a great deal of money to such a person. I am offering it out of consideration for my mother's family. Take it, sign the release, and I will send you back to Ludlow in a post-chaise, and we shall part on excellent terms." "That is very fully put," said Lavinia. "Then you will take it." "No, sir, you will not take £200. I will not sign a release of a thing before I know what the thing is." She had her hands in her lap. Her voice did not rise at any point in the 11 minutes that followed, and Mrs. Hibbert, who repeated the whole of it afterwards to her sister at Leominster, said that the young lady spoke the whole time as though she were reading out the weather. "You are welcome to think the clause a whim, and Mr. Pringle is welcome to advise you that it is void. Those are matters for a court, and I have no wish for a court either. But the survey is not a matter for a court. It is a matter of a chain and a tape, and a person willing to walk 1.5 miles of wood with them, and when it is done I shall know precisely what is standing in Hallodean Chase. And so, I imagine, will you if you ask, and then if you wish to buy the timber, you may make me an offer for it, and I will consider the offer on its merits, as anyone would." "An offer for it," said Mr. Bagot. "Yes, for firewood." "For the timber, sir, and what?" he said with the beginning of the laugh in it. "Does Miss Strickland conceive the timber to be worth?" And here Lavinia Strickland did the only thing in the whole 11 days that she afterwards allowed had been at all deliberate on her side, though she maintained to the end of her life that it was also the exact truth, which it was. "I do not yet know," she said. "I have 311 trees to look at, and I have looked at 241. When I have looked at the rest, I shall tell you the figure, and I shall tell it to you before I tell it to anybody else, because you are the owner of the soil and it is your right to hear it first. I would rather not guess in front of you. My father used to say that a guess spoken aloud has to be defended afterwards, and a man who is defending his guess has stopped looking at the tree. Mr. Folkebagot sat back and laughed his comfortable laugh, and said that she was a very singular young woman, and that her father sounded a very tedious old gentleman, and rang for the boy, and told her the offer would stand until the 20th, and not one day beyond it, and Lavinia rose and thanked him for the tea, which she had not drunk, and went out. And Mrs. Hibbert gathered the tray and went out after her, and neither of them said one word to the other until they were the whole length of the passage away, at which point the housekeeper said, in a low voice, Miss, 241. It were 204 on Monday. 262 by this evening, said Lavinia, if the rain holds off. And you never told him? He did not ask me the number, Mrs. Hibbert. He asked me the value. It is a different question and it wants a different answer, and I have given him the true one to both. They went into the estate room and shut the door, and Mrs. Hibbert stood with her back against it, which she had not done in 26 years of service, and said, "How much, miss?" Lavinia looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the fare book at the last written page and turned it round on the deal table, so that the housekeeper could see the running total in the last column, cast up in a small, clear hand at the foot of every day's work. Mrs. Hibbert read it. Mrs. Hibbert had kept house accounts for 26 years, and could add a column faster than the curate. "Miss," she said at last, "that is not £200. No, that is not £2,000. No," said Lavinia, "it is not." And she closed the book, and tied the tape, and put it in the drawer with the 61 notebooks, and locked the drawer, and put the key on the ribbon round her neck, and from that afternoon until the 22nd of June it did not leave her, waking or sleeping, once. The thing that broke it open came 4 days later, and it did not come from Hallowdene at all. It came from Bristol, and it came because Mr. Folkebagot had a creditor in Clifton who had begun to write him a certain kind of letter, and because a man in that situation cannot wait until Michaelmas for anything. On the 10th of May, Mr. Raisbury of Broad Street, Leominster, being in Hereford upon other business, fell into conversation at the Green Dragon with a Mr. Chubb of Bristol, timber merchant and shipbuilder's agent, who was in the county to look at a quantity of oak, and who supposed reasonably enough that a Leominster attorney would know the country. Mr. Chubb was in an expansive humour. He had made a purchase, he said, a very good purchase, the best he had made in 3 years, and he was going out on the morrow to see it on the ground for the first time. Mr. Raisbury asked, in the way of conversation, where it lay. "Ashwardine," said Mr. Chubb. "The Hallowdene Wood. 311 oaks, standing, as they stood the whole of the parcel, bark, tops and all, bought of the owner Mr. Bagot by articles signed at Bristol on the 15th of April, £5,600, 1,000 of it paid down on signature, and the residue at the felling, and the felling to begin at midsummer, and the timber to go by wain to Chepstow, and thence by water. And did Mr. Raisbury happen to know the state of the drift road, because £5,600 worth of oak wants a solid road under it?" Mr. Raisbury, who had been 34 years an attorney, and had never in the whole of that time allowed his face to be of any use to anybody, said that the drift road was tolerable in a dry season, and asked after Mr. Chubb's journey, and drank his wine, and rode home to Leominster the same night, although it was 19 miles and dark. And at 8 the next morning his clerk, Misty Fenn, was on the Ashwardine carrier's cart with a letter, and by noon Lavinia Strickland was standing at the north window of the estate room with the letter in her hand, reading one sentence of it over for the 4th time. Articles signed at Bristol on the 15th of April. £1,000 paid down. The 15th of April was 11 days before Mr. Pringle's civil offer of £200, and it was 5 weeks before probate. He had sold the trees. He had sold for £5,600 to a Bristol house, in writing, under his hand, 311 oaks that were not his. He had taken £1,000 of another man's money on the strength of it, and then, having spent a part of that £1,000, he had sat down and offered the true owner £200 for a release, and had written in his own hand at the foot of his attorney's letter that she would not get such another offer. A person of a different temper would have gone across the sweep that same hour with the letter in her hand. Lavinia Strickland put it in the drawer with the fair book, and locked the drawer, and went out with Mr. Yarnold and Tabitha, and did 19 trees before the light went. She afterwards gave 2 reasons for that, and they were both true. The first was that the survey was not finished, and that a survey which is 9/10 finished is a survey that a barrister can take to pieces in 11 minutes, and she had no intention of standing up anywhere with 9/10 of anything. The second was that she did not yet know what she wished to happen. It is easy, at 24, with a thing of that size in one's hand, to know what one wishes to happen to the other person. It is a good deal harder, and it takes a walk of some miles under trees, to work out what one wishes to happen to oneself. She worked it out on the 12th and 13th of May, walking the north half of the Chase, and what she settled on was this, that she did not want a suit, that she did not want her cousin ruined, which she could not in any case have prevented or produced, that she wanted 311 trees kept out of a Bristol wain until she had decided which of them ought to go and which ought to stand another 50 years, and that whatever was done, it should be done in public, in front of the people who would have to live in the parish afterwards, and not in a private room with the door shut and 2 attorneys speaking a language that was designed a long time ago for the express purpose of not being understood by the person it is spoken about. That last was the whole of her policy, and she never departed from it. The rest of May went in the wood. They finished the numbered trees on the 24th. On the 25th and 26th, she went back over the 4 she had been wrong about and wrote the corrections in red. On the 27th, 28th, and 29th, she and Tabitha copied the whole survey fair, in duplicate in a clear round hand, on paper bought at Leominster at 8 the quire, 311 trees, by number, by girth at 5 feet, by content in loads and feet, by quality, and by mark, the 96 broad arrows entered in a column of their own, the 4 corrections in red with the date of the correction, and at the foot of the last sheet, cast up twice, and initialed at both castings, 800 loads and 11 feet. Whereof compass timber, marked to the crown in the year 1809, 261 loads. Her own total and the Navy clerk's total, taken 10 years apart, differed by 11 cubic feet in 800 loads. Mr. Raisbury, when he saw the 2 figures set side by side on the 31st of May, took off his spectacles and put them on again and read it a second time, and then said something to his clerk in the next room that his clerk never repeated to a living soul but which caused Mr. Fenn to come in and look at the sheet himself. On the 1st of June, the attorney did 4 things: at Lavinia's direction, in her presence, in her order. He entered a caveat in the proper form. He obtained from the registry an office copy of the will and of the schedule annexed to it, and had 2 further copies engrossed on vellum, one to be kept at Leominster and one at Hallowdene. He wrote to the Honourable the Principal Officers and Commissioners of His Majesty's Navy at the Navy Office, enclosing a copy of the survey of 1809, and inquiring whether the 96 oaks marked with the broad arrow in Hallowdene Chase in that year remained upon the board's book of reserved timber, and if so, in whose favour the purchase money was payable. And he wrote a second and private letter to Mr. Jonathan Kellaway, purveyor, at Plymouth Dock, which contained 11 lines of business, and 1 line at the end which he showed to Lavinia before he sealed it, and which she asked him to leave in. It read, "The lady who has taken this survey desires me to say that you once told a child on a churchyard wall at Lanbrook why a crooked tree is worth 3 straight ones, and that she has spent 15 years finding out that you were right. And fourthly, he laid before Sir Miles Beresford of Ashwardine, a justice of the peace for that county, the 2 fair copies of the survey, which Miss Strickland and Mr. Thomas Yarnold and Miss Tabitha Yarnold there and then made oath to severally upon the book, in the presence of the said justice, and of Mr. Bramwell the curate. And Sir Miles, who was 70, gouty, deaf in the left ear, and had known Sylvanus Croft for 50 years, signed his name under all 3 of theirs, and then sat looking at the sheets for a while, and said, 'Miss Strickland, whose notion was the 4 in red?' 'Mine, Sir Miles.' 'Why did you not leave them out? You had only to leave them out. Nobody would have known.' 'I should have known,' said Lavinia, 'and so would the trees.' Sir Miles Beresford laughed until he had to be given his stick, and told that story at every dinner table in the 100 for the next 9 years. Now there remained the promise she had made in the South Library on the 5th of May, and on the 3rd of June she kept it. She walked across the sweep at 10 in the morning with the fair copy under her arm, and sent in her name, and was kept waiting 40 minutes in the hall, which she spent looking at a map of the county on the wall, and was shown into the South Library, where Mr. Fulke Bagot was at breakfast at noon, with the shutters half closed. "Cousin," he said, "you are come about the release. I told you the 20th of May, and this is the 3rd of June. But I am not a hard man, and I dare say Pringle can be brought to renew it. 200, in 2 payments. I am not come about the release," said Lavinia. "I am come to tell you the figure as I said I would, before I tell it to anybody else." Ah, he put down his cup, and put up the quizzing glass, and let it fall. "The famous figure. Well, madam, name it. I have a wager with myself about it, and I shall not tell you which way I have laid. 800 loads and 11 feet, at £9 the load, and I make no charge for the 261 loads of compass timber above the common rate, which any yard in England would pay, and which I am entitled to ask for, and do not ask." She set the fair copy on the table beside his plate, squarely, so that it faced him. £7,200. That is what is standing in Hallowdene Chase, sir, and it is all set out there by number, and it has been sworn to before Sir Miles Beresford, and the 4 places where my own eye was at fault are marked in red, so that you may find them without hunting. The room was quiet. Somewhere out at the back of the house a maid was beating a carpet, and the sound came in through the half-closed shutters at intervals. Mr. Bagot did not touch the paper. 7,000, he said. 200. For a wood. For 311 oaks, said Lavinia, of which 96 are compass timber marked to the crown 10 years ago, and are, I am advised, upon the Navy Board's book at this hour, which is why your uncle would not let his woodward take so much as a bow out of that wood for 30 years, and why he kept the trees 100 feet apart when he might have had 4 times the number and 1/4 the value. And it is why, sir, he wrote the clause. He did not divide his property between us. Like Solomon, he divided it exactly as a man divides it who knows precisely what each half is worth and has formed an opinion about which of the two of us would trouble to find out. That was the only sentence Lavinia Strickland spoke in the whole of that summer, which she afterwards wished she had left unspoken, not because it was untrue, but because it was unnecessary. And she was not, on the whole, a woman who said unnecessary things. Mr. Foucault-Bagot's colour went up from the cravat, and then, and this was the thing Mrs. Hibbert could never afterwards account for, it went down again, and he laughed. He laughed a great deal. He laughed and wiped his eyes, and said that it was the most extraordinary piece of impudence he had met with in 48 years, that any fool could put figures on a piece of paper, that the wood had been valued at Bristol by a man who bought and sold timber for his bread, which she did not, and that any competent person could tell her what it was worth without a chain, and without a month in the brambles, and without a countryman's daughter to hold the ink, that she had been reading a book, and that he would say this for her: she was a game young woman, and she had frightened Pringle a little, and he would go to 250, and not a penny beyond it, and she might take it, or she might go to law and be 4 years about it, and eat every farthing she had in costs. And when I have the answer from the Navy office, said Lavinia. Will you look at that? When you have an answer from the Navy office, my dear cousin, said Mr. Bagot, I will look at it with the greatest pleasure in the world. Then I shall bring it to you, she said. And I am obliged to you for the promise, because there will be gentlemen present when I do, and it will save a great deal of argument that you have made it. She took up the fair copy and left it, deliberately, on the breakfast table beside his plate, and went out. He did not read it. That is known, because Mrs. Hibbert had it from the girl who cleared the room, who found the fair copy under the newspaper at 4 in the afternoon with a ring from the coffee pot on the second sheet, and brought it away, and dried it at the kitchen fire, and carried it back to the estate room herself. 11 days later, on the 14th of June at 6 in the morning, 7 men came up the Drift Road from the Leominster side with 2 wains, 8 horses, felling axes, saws, wedges, and a Bristol foreman named Paget, who had his orders in writing and did not expect any difficulty about them. Mr. Yarnold was standing in the middle of the ride at the north gate, with his hat on, and beside him were his brother, the sexton, Mr. Whittle the tanner, and 11 other men of the parish of Ashwardine, who had come out of their beds in the dark for no wages whatever, and none of them had so much as a stick in his hand, which was Lavinia Strickland's express, and repeated direct, twice given the evening before and once again at the gate, and it was obeyed to the letter. She came down the ride at 6:15 in her grey gown with the tape still round her neck. She asked Mr. Paget whether he could read. He said that he could. She gave him the office copy of the will engrossed on vellum and asked him to read the third clause aloud to his own men, since they were the persons who would be liable, and not himself. He read it. It took him some time. He read it twice, the second time slowly. Then he stood in the ride with the vellum in his hand and said, "Ma'am, I were told the timber went with the land." "You were told wrong, Mr. Paget, and not by anyone here. Who owns un, then?" "I do," said Lavinia Strickland. "Every stick, for 99 years, and the bark and the tops besides, and the ways to carry it out. If any man puts an axe into a tree in this wood today, he does it against a devise that is entered at the registry, and against a caveat, and it is he who will answer for it. And I will bring the action myself, and I will bring it against the man who swung the axe, and not against his master, because his master is not the person who did the thing." There was a silence in the ride. Somewhere behind them one of the 8 horses shifted and blew. "But I would very much rather," she went on in exactly the same voice, "that nobody answered for anything, and that you had your breakfast, and Mrs. Hibbert has bread and bacon and small beer for 9 at the kitchen door, and it is a long way back to Bristol on an empty stomach. Mr. Paget, will you take the vellum to Mr. Bagot at the house, and tell him from me that the men are eating and that I shall be at the gate until 8? Mr. Paget took the vellum to the house. The 7 men ate their breakfast at the kitchen door at Hallowdene Court, and 2 of them afterwards helped Mr. Yarnold shift a fallen ash out of the ride, because it was there and they were. And at 8, the wains went back down the drift road empty, and the parish of Ashwardine, standing about the north gate in the early sun, watched them go and did not cheer, because she had asked them not to, and because a parish that has watched a thing done properly does not need to cheer to know that it has been done. At 9 o'clock that morning, Mr. Fulke Bagot's boy rode for Leominster with a letter to Mr. Pringle at Bristol, and at 11 the mail from the south came in at Leominster with 2 letters for Mr. Raisbury, one bearing the frank of the Navy Office, and one addressed in a heavy sloping hand from Plymouth Dock. And at 4 in the afternoon, Mr. Fenn the clerk was on the carrier's cart to Ashwardine for the 2nd time that month. The advertisement had gone into the Hereford Journal on the 2nd of June, and into the Bristol paper on the 4th, and it was posted on the door of the Moot Hall at Leominster and on the church door at Ashwardine, which was how the parish came to be so well informed about the whole affair. And how, on the morning of Tuesday, the 22nd of June, 1819, the Moot Hall came to be full. To timber merchants, shipbuilders, and others. To be sold by auction at the Moot Hall in Leominster on Tuesday the 22nd day of June at 12 o'clock precisely, by direction of Fulke Bagot, Esquire. The whole of the oak timber, standing in Hallowdene Chase, in the parish of Ashwardine, comprising 311 trees of large dimension, with the bark and tops, together with liberty of felling and carriage. The timber is of the first quality, and has not been cut for upwards of 60 years. It was a handsome advertisement, and it did him a great deal of harm. And it did him harm for a reason that Mr. Pringle, in Bristol, saw at once and could not persuade his client to see at all, that a man who has already sold a thing by private articles on the 15th of April does not advertise it for public auction on the 2nd of June, unless he is trying to make a second market out of the first, and that neither market will forgive him when they meet in the same room. They met in the same room. The Moot Hall was long and low, with a plaster ceiling and 11 windows down the south side, and by noon there were something over 90 persons in it. There was Mr. Chubb of Bristol, in a brown coat with his articles in his pocket, arrived the night before in a temper he was keeping for a purpose. There was Mr. Pringle, attorney, who had come up from Small Street on the mail against his own advice. There was Mr. Bagot in the new coat. There was Mr. Raisbury of Broad Street, with a japanned tin case and a green bag. There was Sir Miles Beresford on a chair by the fire, with his gouty foot on a stool, and the curate and the tanner, and Miss Yarnold and Tabitha, and Mrs. Hibbert in her bombazine, and Miss Dallow, and 31 men and 11 women of the parish of Ashwardine, who had walked in 11 miles, and stood along the north wall under the windows in a row. There were 4 timber merchants from Hereford, Worcester and Ross, and a shipwright's agent from Bridgewater. There was a gentleman at the back by the door in a plain black tailcoat with his hat in his hand, who had ridden over from the far side of the county to buy 200 feet of oak for the bridge at his own park, and had heard something in the road, and had stayed, and nobody in the room paid him the smallest attention for the first hour and a half, which was exactly as he preferred it. And in the front on the second chair from the auctioneer's table, in a grey gown and a straw bonnet, with a japanned case at her feet and a canvas-bound book on her knee, sat Miss Lavinia Strickland. The auctioneer was a Mr. Yap of Hereford. He had a good voice and a bad conscience, and he had been made uneasy since the Saturday, when Mr. Raisbury had called upon him at his inn and shown him a certain office copy and left him to think about it. He rose at 12 and did not get past the second sentence. "Before the first lot," said Mr. Raisbury, standing up, "and with the leave of the room and of the vendor, I am instructed to ask that 4 documents be read aloud." "This is a sale, sir, not an assize," said Mr. Pringle. "It is a sale of 311 trees," said Mr. Raisbury, "and I am for the owner of them, and the shortest road out of this room for everybody in it, including your client, is that the papers be read before the money is bid, and not after. Mr. Yap, I put it to you as an auctioneer of 30 years' standing. Would you rather hear them now, or explain them to the Court of Chancery at Michaelmas?" Mr. Yap said, with feeling, that he would rather hear them now. So they were read aloud in the Moot Hall at Leominster on the 22nd of June, before something over 90 witnesses, and it took 40 minutes, and it was the whole of the case. First, the 3rd clause of the last will and testament of Sylvanus Croft, gentleman deceased, read from the office copy by Mr. Fenn in a clear carrying voice. The timber of Hollowdean chaise, with the stools, the tops, the lop, the bark and the offal thereof, and free ingress, egress and regress by the chaseways and the drift road, to Lavinia Mary Strickland, spinster, for 99 years, without let, hindrance or payment to any person whomsoever. Second, the schedule annexed. The survey of the year 1809, taken by Jonathan Kellaway, purveyor to the Navy Board, in the presence of the testator, Thomas Yarnold, holding the chain. Mr. Fenn did not read the whole of the 17 sheets. He read the heading, the first 6 entries, the last 6 and the total, and then the column of marks. And when he came to the column of marks, he read out the number of trees in Hollowdean Chase, bearing the broad arrow of the crown, and he read it slowly. 96. There was a sound in that room, which Mrs. Hibbert described afterwards as the sound of a great, many people deciding at the same moment not to say anything. Third, a letter from the Navy Office, dated the 9th of June, signed by a secretary, in answer to Mr. Raisbury's enquiry of the 1st, that the 96 oaks marked in Hallowdene Chase in the year 1809 remained upon the board's book of reserved timber, that the board's mark was not extinguished by any sale or devise of the soil, that no such tree could lawfully be felled, converted, or carried away without the board's license, and that the purchase money for any of the said trees taken into the service, at the current rate for compass timber, was payable to the owner of the timber, and to no other person. To which the secretary added, the yards being full since the peace, that the board did not at present propose to take the said 96 trees into the service, and enclosed a license under the board's hand to fell and convert the same, to be exercised by the owner of the timber, or by her assigns, and by no other person whatsoever. Mr. Fenn read the enclosure as well, since it was short. It was a license, granted upon her application of the 1st of June, to Lavinia Mary Strickland, spinster, of Hallowdene in the county of Hereford, and there were men in that room who had bought and sold oak for 30 years, and had never in their lives seen one. Fourth, and last, the survey of the spring of 1819, 311 trees, number, girthed at 5 feet, contented in loads and feet, qualified and marked, sworn before Sir Miles Beresford, Justice of the Peace, on the 1st of June, by Lavinia Mary Strickland, Thomas Yarnold, and Tabitha Yarnold, total 800 loads and 11 feet, whereof compass timber 261 loads, 4 entries corrected in red, with the dates of the corrections. Mr. Fenn sat down. Mr. Yapp did not attempt to rise. Mr. Pringle got up. He was a dry, honest, tired man of 55, who had come 109 miles to do a thing he had already advised against twice in writing, and he did it properly, because that was his trade. "Madam," he said, "I shall put 3 questions, and I shall put them plainly. First, this clause severs the timber from the soil. Where is your authority that such a devise is good?" "That is Mr. Raisbury's part," said Lavinia, "and he has it in the green bag." Mr. Raisbury had it in the green bag. It took him 4 minutes. "Second," said Mr. Pringle, "grant the devise good. It speaks of the timber of Hallowdene Chase." "Which timber?" "A wood is not a fixed thing. Trees fall. Trees are planted. 10 years have gone by since your schedule. If you cannot say which 311 trees the testator meant, the devise is void for uncertainty, and this room may go to its dinner." "I can say which," said Lavinia Strickland. She stood up. She had been sitting with the canvas-bound book on her knee for an hour and a half, and she did not open it. "Number 1 is inside the north gate on the left hand, 22 feet in girth, first limb at 11 feet. Compass, marked. Number 2 is 9 paces northeast of it on the bank, 17 feet 4 inches, straight, sound, not marked. Number 3 is the forked tree at the corner of the ride. It lost its west limb in the gale of the year 14, and the wound is grown over, and the timber is sound behind it. 19 feet 1 inch, 4 loads and a quarter, compass, marked." She paused. "There are 311 of them, sir, and I have stood under every one twice. And I will go on if you wish, but I would rather do it in the wood than in this room, and I will take any gentleman here out to the chase tomorrow morning, and put my hand on the numbers in the order he names them." Mr. Pringle looked at her for a moment. Third question, he said. 4 of your entries are corrected in red. Why are they there? Because I was wrong 4 times, said Lavinia. On 4 trees with rot at the butt that I could not see from the ground, and Mr. Yarnold opened one of them with a borer, and I found I had put a load and a half on a tree that had not got it. I could have copied the survey fair without them. I did not, because a survey with no corrections in it has either been taken by an angel or by somebody who intends you to take it on trust, and I do not ask this room to take anything on trust. The 4 are entered with the dates. 2 of them are in your client's favor. Mr. Pringle stood quite still for the space of about 3 breaths. Then he turned and said to the room and not to her, I have no further questions, and then he said to his client in a lower voice, which perhaps 30 people heard, Sir, I advised you on the 12th of May, and I advised you on the 2nd of June, and I now advise you for the last time. Buy the timber or be sued upon your articles. There is no third road out of this hall. What followed took an hour and 10 minutes and was mostly arithmetic, and the parish of Ashwardine stood along the north wall under the 11 windows and watched every stroke of it. Mr. Chubb of Bristol produced his articles of the 15th of April and read out the material part himself. 311 oaks standing in Hallodean Chase, sold by Fulke Bagot to William Chubb for £5,600, 1,000 paid down on signing, the residue at the felling, delivery to begin at midsummer, and in default of delivery of the whole, the vendor to repay the said £1,000 and to pay the further sum of £3,000 as liquidated damages, agreed between the parties. Then Mr. Chubb put his articles back in his pocket and said, Now, Mr. Bagot, you have sold me a wood you never owned, and I have had my journey twice for nothing. I will have the timber, or I will have £4,000, and I do not greatly care which, and I shall have one of them before I sleep in Bristol again. And Mr. Fulke Bagot, in the new coat, in front of 91 persons, sat with his hands on his knees, and did the sum at last, and did it correctly. To fail was to pay Chubb £4,000, and to have a judgment against him in the county he had lived in for 11 weeks. To perform was to buy the timber from his cousin and deliver it, and to take from Chubb the £4,600 still owing on the articles, which left one figure to be settled, and only one, and every person in the Moot Hall knew what it was, because it had been read aloud 20 minutes earlier from a sheet sworn before a justice of the peace. He tried, once, for less. It should be recorded that he tried. He rose and said that he would give £5,000. £7,200, said Lavinia Strickland. £7,200. It was 7,200 on the 3rd of June in the South Library at Hallodean, when I brought it to you before I brought it to anybody, sir, as I said I would. And you left it under the newspaper. It is 800 loads, and 11 feet at £9 the load, which is the yard price and not a penny above it, and I make no charge for 261 loads of compass timber that any yard in the kingdom would pay half as much again for. It was the figure in May. It is the figure in June. It will be the figure in October. I do not move it, because it is not an opinion. Mr. Raisbury had, at Mr. Pringle's written request of the previous Thursday, procured the attendance in the Moot Hall that morning of Mr. Vele, of Messrs. Chandos and Vele, bankers of Hereford, and the business of the mortgage of the manor and lands of Hallodean, 440 acres, the house, the home farm, and the walled garden, to secure the sum of £7,200 at 5 per centum, took the 2 attorneys and the banker 50 minutes at the end of the long table, with the sun coming round to the south windows, while 91 people waited, and nobody left the room. At 20 minutes past 3 Mr. Vale drew and signed a draft upon his house at Hereford for £7,000, and laid it on the table, and for the odd 200, which the bank would not add to a round draft, and which Mr. Bagot had about him in a pocket book, because he had come to Leominster expecting to be paid money and not to pay it, he counted out, on the green baize of the Moot Hall table, in front of the auctioneer, the 2 attorneys, the banker, the timber merchant, the shipwright's agent, the justice of the peace, the curate, the tanner, the woodward and his daughter, the housekeeper, the butler, 4 merchants, 31 men and 11 women of the parish of Ashwardine, and a gentleman standing at the back by the door with his hat in his hand, 10 notes of £10, 4 notes of 20, and 20 sovereigns, one at a time, out of his hand, into a small pile, and the room heard every one of the 20 go down. Then he pushed the whole of it across the bays to a young woman in a grey gown who had come into that town in March on the outside of the Ludlow coach with £11 a year, and said, in a voice that did not carry as well as it had carried in the church porch on the 2nd of May, "The timber is yours to sell to me. Madam, sell it." "It is sold," said Lavinia Strickland. "Mr. Raisbury has the memorandum ready, and I will sign it now." She signed it at the auctioneer's table with the pen Mr. Fenn gave her, and she did not look up while she was signing, and Tabitha Yarnold, who was standing behind her chair, said ever afterwards that the lady's hand was as level on that signature as it had been on the 3rd sheet of the survey, and that she wrote the whole of her name, Lavinia Mary Strickland, without hurrying any part of it. Mr. Jonathan Kellaway came up from Plymouth Dock on the 28th of June. He was 61 by then, and had been 11 years ashore in the surveying branch, and had no business whatever travelling 150 miles in June at his own charges, and he came because a Leominster attorney had put 11 lines of business into a letter, and then had put 1 line at the end of it that was not business at all. He arrived at Ashwardine on the carrier's cart, as she had, and walked up the drift road to the north gate with his coat over his arm, and found a young woman in a grey gown standing inside it, with a girthing tape round her neck and a canvas-bound book under her arm, waiting, because Mr. Raisbury's note had come the day before, and she had been at the gate since 7. He stopped 4 paces off and looked at her for a while. "Lanbrook," he said. "Yes, on the wall. Bread and cheese. You asked me how I knew which ones." "You told me," said Lavinia Strickland, "that the frame of a ship is all curves, and that a sawn curve cuts across the grain and a grown curve does not, and that the tree a forester despises is the tree the yard wants worst in the world. I was 9. You gave me the whole of it in about 4 minutes, and then you went back down to the river. And you went and got a book." "I went and got a book," she agreed, "and my father paid 9 shillings for it that he had not got, and it is on the table in the estate room at this moment with your survey beside it, and there are 11 cubic feet between us in 800 loads. Mr. Kellaway, and I have never in my life been so pleased about anything. They walked the chase for 2 days. There is no need to give the whole of it. It was the best conversation either of them had ever had, and neither of them ever tried to describe it to anybody afterwards, because it consisted almost entirely of numbers and of the names of parts of trees, and because those who were present at any part of it, which is to say, Mr. Yarnold, Miss Tabitha Yarnold, and, on the second afternoon, Mr. Bramwell the curate, all reported the same thing, that the two of them walked from tree to tree, saying things like a load and 3/4 in the second limb, and he would take that at the second fork and not the first, and that the old man laughed 4 times, and that once at the great tree on the crown of the slope, number 79, he stood under it for a long while without speaking, and then said, "I marked her on the Friday afternoon, and I have thought about her twice a year for 10 years, and the lady said, 6 loads and 1/4. And he said, 6 1/4 it is, and they stood there together, like 2 people at a grave, except that they were both perfectly happy." He confirmed the marks. That was the business of it, and it took him one morning. He went round the 96 with the 2 surveys in his own hand, and found every mark where it was written down, and set his name and the date under both castings, and that was the last stone in a wall that no attorney in England was going to get over afterwards. At dinner on the second day, in the kitchen at Hallodean, because the house was Mr. Bagot's and she would not sit at his table, Mr. Kellaway said, "Your uncle knew what he was about, ma'am. There's not a wood in the Marches kept like that." I told him so in the year 9. I asked him why he grew crooks when he could have grown a pitwood crop and been paid 3 times over inside of 30 year, and he said a thing I remembered. What did he say? He said, "A man may make money out of a wood in 30 years, or he may make timber out of it in 150, and I am too old to be in a hurry." Lavinia Strickland put down her knife and looked at the table for a moment. "Mr. Kellaway," she said, "did he ever speak to you of his family?" "He never spoke to me of anything but oak," said the purveyor, "and I never wanted him to." She found the answer to that question herself 3 weeks later, on the 11th of July, and she found it in the ordinary way, which is to say, by working through a press of papers she had a perfect right to work through, and had been putting off because there were 311 trees to attend to first. The 61 marbled notebooks had come to her under the will with the survey and the instruments. 61 of them, 1 to a year and some years 2, 1758 to 1818, in 3 hands, the grandfather's, which was large and careless, the father's, which was upright, and Sylvanus Croft's own, which was cramped and grew smaller with age, and which occupied the last 41 volumes. She read them from the beginning. It took her the rest of the summer, and it is the reason there is not much to say about her July. Trees planted, trees felled, gales, the price of bark, the price of a load at Chepstow, the wages of a woodward, the names of men who had held the chain for 3 generations, a record kept by 3 men who were dead, of a thing none of them lived to see finished. And in the volume for the year 1807, between the entry for the 4th of November and the entry for the 9th, folded twice and gone brown at the folds, she found a letter, and pinned to the letter with a rusted pin a drawing. The letter was from her father. "Sir, you will not know my hand, and I have no claim upon your notice. I married your niece Mary Croft in the year 92, against the wishes of her family, and, as I have been given to understand, particularly against yours. I do not write on that subject, upon which nothing can now be usefully said by either of us. I write because my daughter, who is 12 years old, has this autumn taken it into her head to measure and to draw the oaks of this parish, and has asked me a question I cannot answer, namely why the crooked trees are cut and the straight ones left standing in the wood above the ferry, and having inquired of the purveyor's man, who says the matter is one of grown curves and sawn curves, and refers me to a book I cannot procure in this county. I am told by my churchwarden that the best kept oak wood between Hereford and the sea is at Halladine in the parish of Ashwardine, and that the gentleman who keeps it is my wife's uncle. I therefore ask you, not as a relation to which I have no title, but as one man who does not like to leave a child's question unanswered, asking another who is able to answer it, what should I tell her? I enclose her drawing of the tree in question. She has put the girth at the foot of it. She measured it herself with a cord, and I am assured by the purveyor's man that she has it within 3 inches. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Josiah Strickland, Lanbrook, the 2nd of November 1807. The drawing was of an oak in a hedge above a river, in watercolour, on a half sheet, done by a child of 12 who could not yet draw bark, and who had got the shape of the head of the tree exactly right. In the corner, in a large, careful round hand, girth at 5 feet, 16 feet and 9 inches. L. M. Strickland her drawing, aged 12 years. And along the bottom of the letter, in the cramped hand of a man of 70, in ink that had gone the same brown as the vellum of his will, Sylvanus Croft had written his answer to it, or rather had written the answer he made in his own book, since there was no evidence in the world that he had ever posted one to Lanbrook. Tell her a grown curve carries its grain round the bend, and a sawn one is cut across it, and that this is the whole of the matter, and everything else is arithmetic. She has the girth within 3 inches at 12 years old. There is nobody of my own blood that can do it at 50. Lavinia Strickland sat in the estate room at Halladine, with that half sheet in her hand, for a long time. The window was open, and the rooks were going over. Tabitha Yarnold, who came in at 6 with the candles, found her sitting there and went out again without being seen, and told her mother that evening that the lady had been crying, which was not true. Tabitha had it from the doorway, and at that distance the two things are not distinguishable, and Lavinia Strickland did not weep that evening or any other evening of that year, and the reason she gave for it, years afterwards, to one person only, was that she had found the letter 12 years too late to weep about, and about 11 weeks in time to be glad about, and that the second is the better use of an evening. What she did that evening was to take the fair copy of her own survey, and write on the first sheet, above the heading, in her own hand, taken in the spring of 1819 by L. M. Strickland, in continuation of the survey of J. Kellaway, purveyor, of 1809, and of the books of Halladine kept from 1758. And then she put the letter and the drawing back into the volume for 1807, at the same place, between the 4th of November and the 9th, and put the volume back on the shelf in its order, which is where it is at this hour, in a house in the parish of Ashwardine, in the county of Hereford, in a glazed press, with 61 others, and with the 62nd, 63rd, and all the rest of them that she began on the 1st of January following, and kept, in a hand that grew smaller with age, for the next 41 years. The felling began in the last week of September, when the sap was down, and it went on through 2 winters, and it was done properly, which was neither Mr. Chubb's doing nor Mr. Bagot's. It was in the memorandum. Lavinia Strickland had signed away 311 trees on the 22nd of June, at an auctioneer's table with a borrowed pen, and she had signed away nothing else. And Mr. Raisbury, at her direction, had put into the memorandum of sale 4 conditions that cost the purchaser nothing, and that she would not shift on. That the felling be carried out under the direction of Thomas Yarnold, Woodward, at the purchaser's charge. That no stool be grubbed and no ground broken between the 1st of March and the 1st of August in any year, on account of the birds. That the bark be stripped in the spring at the proper season, and offered first to the tanners of that parish and the 4 adjoining, and that the tops and lop of every tree, which were hers under the will and which she gave away, be carted at the purchaser's charge to the north gate, and there divided among the poor of Ashwardine by the curate and the churchwardens in the last week of November, in each of the 2 years. The tops of 311 Marcher oaks are a very great deal of firewood. It came to 11 wains a week for 6 weeks in the first winter. Mr. Bramwell the curate, who had for 6 years been trying to keep 31 households in that parish warm on £80 a year and the coal money, wrote in the parish book against the 24th of November, 1819, this week the lop of the chase divided as directed. No family in Ashwardine cold this Christmas. Deo gratias. And Mr. Whittall the tanner, who had laughed at the leak gate on the 2nd of May until he had to hold the gatepost, bought the bark of the whole 2 seasons at £8.15 the ton, and it was the largest purchase he made in 41 years in that trade, and he made it, as he was fond of pointing out afterwards in the Talbot at Leominster, from the young lady who had been given the kindling. That autumn was also the autumn in which the parish of Ashwardine took her in, and it did it in the way that such parishes do, which is without saying anything about it at any point. It began with the acorns. She wanted seed of her own trees, and not seed out of a nurseryman's sack from Worcestershire, because the notebooks were perfectly clear that the Hallowdene stock had been raised from Hallowdene acorns for 3 generations, and that whatever had made the elbows was in the ground and in the seed, and nobody could say which. And 311 oaks felled in the autumn drop their crop on the ground, whether anybody gathers it or not. So Mr. Bramwell gave it out after the 2nd lesson on the 3rd Sunday in October, and from the Monday there were between 19 and 30 children in the chase every afternoon with sacks, at a penny the peck, paid on the spot out of a leather bag by Miss Tabitha Yarnold, who kept the tally in the same large clear hand in which she had kept the girths. They gathered 1,100 pecks in 3 weeks. Lavinia Strickland paid out £4 11 shillings and 8 pence, which was the cheapest seed ever bought in that county, and the children of Ashwardine had money of their own at Christmas for the first time in the memory of any of them, and there were 4 families in that parish who afterwards dated the whole of their fortunes from it, which was an exaggeration, but not by very much. And because the children were in the wood every afternoon, and because a woman who is sowing an acorn bed cannot sow it and watch 30 children at the same time, she began, without ever quite deciding to tell them what they were doing. Not lessons. She had no gift for lessons, and said so. She showed them the bed and the drill and the depth, and let them do it, and afterwards, when they were sitting on the loading bank, eating the bread and dripping that came up from the court kitchen by Mrs. Hibbert's private arrangement with the new cook, she would answer whatever they asked her, in the same voice in which she had answered Mr. Pringle, and the questions were generally better than his. How long? 50 years to a gatepost, 80 to a beam, 140 to a ship. Who will have them? not you. Your grandchildren, if the parish is lucky and nobody is in a hurry. Then why do it? Because somebody did it here in the year 58, and I am standing in the shade of it. And so are you. There were 11 of them still coming in the spring. And Mr. Bramwell put a reading class into the vestry on Thursday evenings that winter for anyone who wanted one, and Lavinia took it for 4 years. And the books were bought with the money that came in from the tops, and the first thing they read, because it was the only book in the parish of which there happened to be 9 copies, was the Book of Ruth. Mrs. Hibbert came up to the lodge every Tuesday evening from the court in her bombazine, with a basket she always said was nothing, and stayed an hour and a half, and the two of them did the accounts of a 241-acre wood, on the same table where the housekeeper of a Queen Anne house had once been shown a running total in the last column of a fair book, and had put her back against a door. Sir Miles Beresford sent his carriage for her to dine at Ashwardine 11 times in that first year, and told the story about the 4 corrections in red on every one of the 11 occasions, and she let him. The county came to look at her. 3 families in that 100 asked her to dinner in the first winter, for no other reason than to see the young woman out of the Moot Hall, and she went, and was quiet, and was asked again, and by the second winter nobody in that neighbourhood remembered that there had ever been anything remarkable about her at all, which is the highest civility an English county is capable of. Mr. Fulke Bagot lasted until the Michaelmas after next but one, which was rather longer than anybody expected. There is nothing very interesting in the way it went, because it went the way such things always go. He had the £4,600 from Mr. Chubb at the Felling, and he had £1,100 of debts of honour, and a man in Clifton, and there is a species of arithmetic in which 4,600 is smaller than 1,100, and he was a master of it. He mortgaged the estate for £7,200 at 5 per centum in June, which is £360 a year of interest before a farthing of principal. The rental of Hallowdene was £890, and he had, in the course of the same year, put down a curricle, a pair, a man to look after them, and a cook from Bath. By the spring of 1820, he was letting the shooting. By the September, he had sold the plate. In the October, Messrs. Chandos and Vale, bankers of Hereford, being a house of great civility and no sentiment whatever, entered upon their security, and put the manor and lands of Hallowdene up to auction, in 5 lots, at the Moot Hall at Leominster, on Tuesday the 17th of October, 1820. It was the same room. That was nobody's arranging. There was only the one hall in that town and only the one auctioneer worth the name in the county, and Mr. Yap of Hereford had the conduct of it again, and he did it with a good deal more comfort than he had done the last one. Lot 1 was the mansion house, the offices, the gardens, the cedar and 11 acres, with the home farm of 161 acres. It was bought by Mr. Talbot Beresford, who was Sir Miles's son-in-law, and had married the second daughter, and had been looking for a house in that 100 for 4 years, and he kept on Mr. Dallow at £70 a year, and Mrs. Hibbert at 40, and the whole of the indoor servants, and he raised the Woodwards' wages, and the parish, which had had 11 weeks of Mr. Fulke Bagot, and 11 months of nobody, took to him at once, and remained on excellent terms with him for 30 years. Lots 3, 4 and 5 were the outlying farms and went to the sitting tenants. Lot 2 was Hallowdene Chase, 241 acres of woodland ground, described in the particulars, with perfect accuracy and with a certain grim satisfaction on somebody's part, as cut over, the timber having been felled and carried in the last 2 seasons. There is no property in England harder to sell than a wood with no trees in it. The stools were there, and the young growth, and 11 acres of thorn and holly, and the deer paths, and 1.5 miles of ride, and the old loading bank, and the stone rollers, and there was not. Standing upon the whole 241 acres, 1 stick of timber a merchant would have crossed the road for. Mr. Yap opened it at 2,000. He came down to 1,500 in front of a room that included 4 timber merchants who knew to a shilling what was and was not on that ground, and there was 1 bid of 1,600 from a Ross man who wanted the holly, and then there was a pause of the kind that empties a sale room. Miss Lavinia Strickland bid £3,100. She bid it once, in a level voice, from the second chair from the auctioneer's table, and there was no second bid, and Mr. Yap, who had known perfectly well since the Saturday that she meant to have it, brought the hammer down with a good deal of ceremony, and said, "Miss Strickland, £3,100, and the parish of Ashwadine." Standing along the north wall under the 11 windows, exactly where it had stood on the 22nd of June the year before, made a noise which she had not asked them not to make this time, and which lasted rather longer than Mr. Yap thought proper. Nobody in that room could understand why she had paid twice the money. 2 of the 4 timber merchants said so out loud in the passage afterwards. It was cut over, it would not carry a crop of anything but rubbish for 80 years. A wood is worth its timber, and there was no timber. £3,100 for 241 acres of stools was, said the Worcester man, the most sentimental piece of business he had seen in his life. She had £4,000 in the funds when she walked into the Moot Hall, and she had 900 when she walked out of it, and the parish had it that she had beggared herself for the sake of a graveyard. Here is what she had bought, and she had it written down, and it was not sentiment. 241 acres of ground that had grown, without manure, without draining, and without any attention beyond a woodward and a fence, 311 oaks of an average content of 2.5 loads, of which nearly a third were compass timber of the first quality, which is to say the best oak ground in the county of Hereford, proved over 150 years by 3 men who wrote down what they did. 311 stools, of which 249, by her own count in the March following, had thrown healthy shoots. 11 acres of natural young growth already 12 to 16 years old under the old timber. The right-of-way by the drift road. The loading bank. The lodge house at the north gate, brick, 5 rooms, sound roof, which went with the lot and which had been empty since the year 6, and the whole of the ground lying between 400 and 600 feet, facing southeast, on the red marl, which is the soil that made the elbows. She moved into the lodge at the north gate in the November of 1820, with a bed, a table, 4 chairs, a pianoforte carted from Ludlow, 3 albums, 61 marbled notebooks, 1 stained octavo volume on the mensuration of timber, and Miss Tabitha Yarnold, who came as her companion at £20 a year and stayed 11 years, and was afterwards married from that house to a Ross corn factor, with Lavinia standing behind her at the rail. And in the March of 1821, having spent the whole winter at the estate books of a house that was no longer hers to sit in, by the courtesy of Mr. Talbot Beresford, who told her to come as often as she liked, and to bring her own candles if she was going to sit that late, she began the planting. 21,000 oaks in the first season, from acorn beds sown the autumn before, out of the crop of her own felled trees, gathered by the children of the parish school at a penny the peck. 31,000 in the second. She planted them at the spacing her uncle's grandfather had used in 1758, which was wider than any nurseryman in England would have advised, and which she had the 61 notebooks to defend. She planted holly and thorn as a nurse, and she planted them thick. And where the natural growth was good, she let it alone entirely, and planted nothing, which is the hardest thing in forestry, and the cheapest. Mr. Yarnold held the line for the first 2 seasons, and his son held it for the next 9. The books for 1821 and 1822 are the 62nd and 63rd volumes, and they are in a clear round hand that is not cramped at all yet. She did not do it out of sentiment, and she did not do it out of grief, and she did not, whatever the Worcester timber merchant said in the passage, do it for the sake of a graveyard. She did it because a purveyor to the Navy Board had told a child of 9 on a churchyard wall above the Y that the yard would pay 3 times over for a grown curve and could not make one, because a silent old man she never met had written in a book that he was too old to be in a hurry, and because she was 25 years old in the autumn of 1820, and had done the arithmetic and had worked out that if she planted in the spring of 1821, the first of those trees would be fit for a shipwright in the year 1971, and that there was nobody now living who would see it, and that this was not a reason against doing it, but the entire reason for doing it, and that somebody had thought so in this parish in every generation since the year 1758, and that she was not going to be the one who stopped the gentleman who had stood at the back of the moot hall by the door, with his hat in his hand on the 22nd of June, 1819, and to whom nobody had paid the smallest attention for the first hour and a half, was Wilfred, 5th Duke of Averingham, and he had ridden 19 miles that morning to buy 200 feet of oak for a bridge in his own park. He did not buy it. He went home without speaking to anybody, and told his mother at dinner that he had seen a young woman name 311 trees out of her head in front of a barrister who was trying to take her to pieces, and that when she was asked why she had written 4 of her own mistakes into a sworn survey in red ink, she had said that she would have known, and so would the trees. And the Dowager Duchess of Averingham, who was 70, and had been 30 years married to a man who could not tell an oak from an elm, and had loved him a good deal, put down her glass, and said, "Wilfred, say that again." He was 36. He had come into the title at 29, on the death of a father who had left him 11,000 acres, a house with a leaking roof over the West Range, an excellent library, and 300 acres of oak wood at the north end of the park, which had not been touched, thinned, measured, or thought about since the year 1794. Because his father had considered woods to be scenery, he was a grave, unhurried, deliberate man with a low voice. He was not clever, and did not suppose himself to be. He had been twice in the way of marrying, and had on both occasions been beaten by his own inability to say anything at the necessary moment. And he had, in the matter of his own timber, the exact and specific problem of a man who owns a great deal of something and has no notion what it is. He wrote to her in the August, and the letter is the reason for everything that came afterwards, and it is worth giving because of what is not in it. There was no condolence in it. There was no reference to her cousin, to the moot hall, to the will, or to her situation. There was no offer of assistance of any kind, and there was no invitation. Madam, I am advised that you have lately taken a survey of the oak timber of Hallodean Chase, and that it is thought a good one. I have between 290 and 310 acres of oak at the north end of this park, which was last looked at in the year 984, and of which I know nothing whatever. And I am told by my steward that I ought to thin it, and by my agent that I ought to fell it, and by my mother that I ought to leave it alone. And as none of the three has walked it, I am no further forward. I do not want an opinion. I want a survey, every tree by number, girth, content, quality, and mark, in the form you have used at Hallodean. I am prepared to pay 30 guineas and the charges of a chain man, and I am willing to wait until it suits you. If you do not undertake such work, I ask your pardon for the enquiry, and beg you will say so plainly. I am, madam, your obedient servant, Averingham Lavinia Strickland. Read that letter twice, and then read the fourth sentence a third time, which was the sentence about the steward and the agent and the mother, and laughed out loud in the estate room at Hallodean, which Tabitha Yarnold had never once heard her do. She wrote back the same day, and undertook it, at 30 guineas, the chain man to be Thomas Yarnold at his own rate, the work to begin when the leaf was off and not before, the survey to be her property until paid for and his absolutely afterwards, and the 4 corrections, if there were 4, to be written in red. It took from the November of 1821 to the March following. There were, in the event, 296 acres and 1,941 oaks, and they were in a shocking state, having been left to crowd each other for 27 years, and she told him so in 11 pages, with the remedy set out in 3, which was to take out 411 trees in the first thinning, and to leave the rest another 20 years, and to stop pretending that a wood is scenery. He read it in 3 days. Then he rode over to Ashwardine and disputed one entry with her, standing in the ride at the north gate of her own chase in the rain, on the ground that a tree she had put down as doubtful at the butt appeared to him perfectly sound. And they went 19 miles the following week, and had it opened with a borer in front of the steward and the agent, and it was rotten to the height of a man's shoulder, and the Duke of Everingham looked at it for a while, and then took off his hat to her in front of both his servants, and said, "I was wrong, madam, and I am glad of it. Because if you had agreed with me, I should have had to wonder about the other 1,940. He paid the 30 guineas on the day the survey was delivered, and he paid Mr. Yarnold on the same day, and he never in the whole of his life offered her 1 shilling that she had not earned. He called on Tuesdays. That began in the April of 1822, and went on for 10 months, and it was the most thoroughly observed courtship in the county of Hereford, because the lodge at the north gate of Hallodean Chase stood on the drift road where the whole parish went by, and because Miss Tabitha Yarnold was in the front room with her work every Tuesday of the 10 months, and because the Dowager Duchess of Averingham came in her own carriage on the second Tuesday of every month from the June onwards, and sat and drank tea in a house of 5 rooms, and said that she had not enjoyed herself so much since the peace. They walked the young plantation, which was 2 years old and knee-high, and looked, to any eye but 2, like a field of weeds. He learned it. That was the courtship, and there was not a great deal else in it. A man of 36, who owned 11,000 acres learning, at the rate of about a mile a week, from a woman of 26, who owned 241, why a tree is left where it is left, and asking every Tuesday one question that he had thought about since the Tuesday before, and being answered. He asked her on the 11th of February, 1823, in the front room of the lodge, with Tabitha Yarnold sent on an errand to the village that both of them saw through, and neither of them mentioned for 40 years afterwards. Miss Strickland. I had not, when I rode into Leominster on the 22nd of June in the year 19, to buy 200 feet of oak, expected this morning. I have loved you, with what dignity I could, and with what patience your work required, since the afternoon you told a barrister in a public hall that you would have known, and so would the trees. I am asking now on no other ground than that I have loved you steadily since that afternoon, to do me the honor of becoming my wife. You have known me too short a time to be in love with me yet. I shall not press you upon that. I ask only that you consider the proposal at your own time and answer me upon your own terms. If your answer is no, the survey work continues exactly as it is, and the proposal shall never be raised again. Lavinia Strickland, who had been standing at the window, turned round. Your Grace, she said, I shall. The settlement was drawn by Mr. Raysbury of Broad Street, Leominster, and executed on the 9th of April, and there is one clause in it that the Dowager Duchess of Averingham thought the best thing in the whole instrument, and said so at the signing, that the 241 acres called Hallodean Chase, with the lodge, the ways and the young plantations thereon, together with the 61 books of the estate, and all books thereafter kept, remained to the sole and separate use of the said Lavinia Mary Strickland, her heirs and assigns, free from the control of her intended husband, and not subject to his debts, which clause the said intended husband had himself instructed, in writing, on the 14th of February, 3 days after she accepted him, before either attorney had raised the subject. The banns were read in the parish church of St. Botolph at Ashwardine on the 3 Sundays of the 6th, the 13th and the 20th of April, 1823, by Mr. Bramwell. And they were read to a church that was full on all 3 of them, and that had not been full on any Sunday in the previous 9 years except at the harvest. They were married there on Thursday the 24th of April at 11 in the morning in a plain church of grey stone with the yews outside it and the light coming in from the south. Mr. Raysbury, 64 and 30 years an attorney of that town, gave her away, and was observed to be unsteady only once, at the beginning. Mr. Bramwell married them. Mr. Thomas Yarnold, Woodward, and Miss Tabitha Yarnold, companion, signed the register as witnesses in a large clear hand apiece. Mrs. Hibbert and Mr. Dallow came up from the court with the whole of the indoor servants. Sir Miles Beresford came on 2 sticks and sat in the front on the north side, and told the story about the 4 corrections in read to his neighbor during the second lesson, in what he believed to be a whisper. And Mr. Jonathan Kellaway, purveyor to the Navy Board, 62 years old, came up 150 miles from Plymouth Dock at his own charges for the second time in 4 years, and stood at the back by the door with his hat in his hand in the same place, as it happens, in which the bridegroom had stood in the Moot Hall at Leominster on the 22nd of June, 1819. She wore a gown of unadorned white muslin and her mother's garnet cross, and she carried nothing at all, and the parish of Ashwardine lined the path from the south porch to the Lyke Gate, both sides, 11 deep at the gate, and did not throw anything, and did not cheer, and took off its hats, and the tanner, Mr. Whittle, who was 71 by then and had laughed at that gate-post on the 2nd of May in the year 19 until he had to held it again. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow, and stories that begin with a knock at a door on a wet evening, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise turning in at a gate, and stories that begin with a letter that has been 18 years sealed, and there are slower than any of those, longer in the asking, and of a most unhurried patience in the answering stories that begin with 14 lines of a clerk's engrossing hand upon a sheet of vellum the color of weak tea. Read out at 11:15 on a Monday morning, in an attorney's front chamber, in a market town, giving 311 trees to a young woman who had never met the man who grew them, and with a well-fed gentleman in a primrose waistcoat turning half round in his chair in her hearing, and laughing, and saying to the room, he left her trees and me the land. He said it on the 29th of March. She said nothing at all. 12 weeks later, he counted £7,200 across a table of green baize into her hand, in front of 91 persons, for all 311 of them. And 16 months after that, she bought the ground they had stood in. And in the spring of the year following, she began to put them back. And so, on the warm pale gold Thursday morning of the 24th of April, 1823, in the parish church of St. Botolph at Ashwardine, in the county of Hereford, under a mild Marcher sky with the rooks going over the yews, Lavinia Mary Strickland, who had measured her first oak with a cord at 12 years old, and had been told she might buy herself a shawl, and had answered by counting 311 trees twice, and writing 4 of her own errors into the record in red, became, by the patient asking of a man who had ridden 19 miles to buy 200 feet of oak, and had stayed to watch her work, the 5th Duchess of Averingham. And she kept the books of Hallowdene Chase in her own hand for 41 years afterwards, and her granddaughter kept them after her. And when the 99 years of her great-uncle's device ran out in the year 1918, the wood was 97 years old, and stood and stands